owners, for independent people. And so we've been very lucky here in that we can access some financial resources to help us in this time. But I saw a very effective commercial where, you know, they were questioning a man about the economic situation and what he found acceptable, and would it be acceptable, is loss of life acceptable in exchange for restarting the economy? So essentially putting money back in our pockets. And he said yes. And they asked him what would be an acceptable number. And he said 70 to 700. They said, so 70 would be an acceptable life loss number for you. And he said yes. And they said, let us show you 70 people. And 70 people came walking out from around the buildings towards him. And those 70 people were his family members. And then they asked him, you know, what's an acceptable number now? And he said 0. So I would say it's a difficult choice for business owners, for those of us who have lost income, who are suffering, who don't have, I can't work in either one of my professions currently. I can't work as a physiotherapist seeing patients in person. I can't work as a photographer seeing clients in person. And it's a very frustrating position to be in. But let's prioritize safety currently over economy until your government has said that it's okay, until we're following the guidelines of the government. So that's my personal position. It's difficult, you know, because we're all in different circumstances. But certainly if you can hold out, please do, and wait for the guidelines of your community. So let's get back to this question.
Okay, yes, for those of you just joining, I'm here with Stephanie Robin, founder of APNPI, and award-winning photographer and speaker and educator, and we're talking about the return to work for newborn photographers and safety precautions that we should consider. We earlier spoke about using face masks and gloves, and now we're on to photographers who have studios. When we are allowed to go back to work, when those photographers are allowed to go back to work, what precautions they should be taking. So we had asked, should clients be leaving shoes outside?
I would say yes. Because it has been shown that the virus can live on the shoe surface, the undersole especially, for up to 5 days. And so it can be transmitted onto the floor. And if you had any toddlers in your, I mean, we all know toddlers are all over the floors and putting things in their mouths. And so I would say, yes, I would take that precaution.
Okay. And we have a number of people watching and a few questions, pertaining to studios. And one is from Christy, and she's asking, what are your thoughts on temperature checks before entering the studio?
Right. So, I mean, anyone can put into place any policy that they like for their business. And so recently at our local Longos, we had an increase in the numbers in Halton, here where I live. That was not to do with, actually the curve was still decreasing, but for our area, the numbers had increased. They had taken a jump over the previous days. And so they instituted a policy over the weekend to check temperatures before you enter the store. And so, yes, you can institute any policy that you like in terms of people entering your retail space, your workplace. And so that is something that I think would be valuable, but you need to ensure that whatever device you are using is a recommended device, is a device that has, you know, very little error, and, you know, something like, don't just buy the first thing you see on Amazon. Go and research, like, what's a proper temperature gun to use, and invest in that so that you have an accurate measure. So a lot of the time, you know, I see people saying, oh, let's, you know, buy these little clips to do pulse oximetry. Well, make sure that you're buying the equipment that you need that's necessary for the age of the client that you're bringing in, as well as the accuracy of its results. You want to have accurate results. You don't want to be, you know, because you might incite fear if someone's not aware that they have a temperature, or that you take their temperature and inaccurately you tell them that they have an elevated temperature. And certainly we don't want to incite panic or fear in our client either, but I do think it's an appropriate measure to take in order to keep yourself and your future clients who will visit your studio safe.
And you should definitely communicate that that is something that you plan to do. You wouldn't want
Yes.
your client to show up and all of a sudden you're, pointing a device at them. So definitely communicate that with your clients should you choose to go that use that tool. Another question, which is related to bringing shoes in. We have a question from Mags, who asks, would you also tell them not to bring strollers / car seats inside the studio and any props?
I would avoid, of course, this again, we're speaking about when it is safe to return to indoor sessions.
Mm-hmm.
I would advise clients not to bring as little into the studio as possible. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be using any outside props or any, outside equipment, if at all possible. I would be recommending people do leave that in their cars. Now, of course, they may transmit virus on their hands if they are now, touching that equipment in order to put it away. And so offering hand washing upon entry is one of the best things that you can do. Hand washing has been found to be more effective than use of hand sanitizers. And so any opportunity that you can in order to, set up a hand washing station or have a hand washing station available for your clients upon entry and, for use multiple times throughout your session would be the best.
Okay. So we're still on the topic of studio photography when we are allowed to go back to that. So we have people asking questions about cleaning. What products and or methods have been recommended, as well as air purifier use. So
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this?
So I do have thoughts. So let's tackle the air purifier first, because I feel that, for cleaning, it's rather, in my view, it's quite simple. Use the products that have been recommended by the WHO and the CDC. Mm-hmm. These are the products that have been found to be the most effective. These are the things that are going to most effectively help to sanitize and follow the instructions on those products. So if it's something that you need to utilize and you need to be wiping that surface for a minute, then make sure that you are doing that for a minute. If it's something that you need to wipe and then let air dry before touching again, then make sure that you're doing that as well. There is a product on the market that we use in physiotherapy. And so this is a medical grade product, however, and I'm not sure about current distribution. And so I would caution against currently purchasing or, bulk purchasing or trying to stock up on those items unless they are readily available to the public. But CAVI wipes, CAVI wipes are a type of wipe that we use in the clinic setting, and it comes, you can have CAVI wipes. There's also sprays that are meant for plinths to disinfect after the clients. And so regular sanitization happens in physiotherapy or medical clinics all over the world every day, regardless of COVID-19. And so after each client, you're sanitizing every surface, and CAVI wipes are one of those wipes where you can get different types of CAVI wipes. CAVI 3 are the ones we use. They require 3 minutes of drying time. So you have to read the instructions and just ensure that you are following appropriately. But make sure that you are using those products that the CDC and the WHO have recommended. Now let's touch on that air purifier question that you had.
Okay. There's not that much information out there about it. And the information that is out there is, they differ. So
I will say that the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, and this is from the United States, so United States Environmental Protection Agency does not recommend relying on an air purifier to protect from COVID-19 in a residential setting. And so I feel that would also translate to a retail setting because, and it doesn't list why, but it is clear and available information on the EPA website. So www.epa.gov. /will-air-purify-protect-me-and-my-family-covid-19-my-home/. So you can
maybe we'll add that below after.
For sure. You can see that for yourself, but they don't recommend that that you rely on an air purifier in order to keep you safe from COVID-19. You know, my personal take on that would be that if I were to be sitting in a room for an extended period of time, there is going to be some mixing of air innately happening without that air being drawn into the HVAC system or you know, your air system. So you have return vents, and then you have these vents in the floors or ceilings or walls that blow air out at you. But certainly air does mingle in a space for an amount of time before it is entering that system to be purified. So the minute I breathe out in my home, the air I've breathed out is not automatically going into a return vent and then, you know, finding its way to a HEPA filter and filtering itself. So the longer amount of time you spend with someone in a closed space, the more risk there is for an intermingling of air. And yes, we do have that 6-foot social distancing recommendation to stay 6 feet apart. However, that's meant for, you know, as I understand it, it's meant for when you're in a public space and you're passing people, and not for when you're, you know, sitting and mingling in the same space with people, even at a 6-foot difference for a prolonged period of time. So air does travel. We know this. Air has currents and flows, and we all learned this in maybe grade 4, 5 science class. I'm not quite sure. But your air is moving constantly. It's moving in your house and it's moving in those retail settings because of those return vents that do suck that air back in. And then those vents that blow the air out, they are causing currents, like wind currents. And so when you breathe in and out, that air that you are inhaling and exhaling isn't directly from a vent of HEPA purified air. It's air that's surrounding you, and that's been there for a while. And so if you're in a contained space with others, I would logically presume that their air is going to remain in that space until it makes its way to a return vent to then go through a system and be filtered. So it's not one of the things that is currently recommended to rely on to keep you safe from COVID-19. So not something that I would spend a lot of time or money investing in.
So not even the little portable units that you could keep in a studio.
I mean, I have that. If you want to have one, I say go for it. If it's something that you believe in, that you think is going to help, in the end, it is going to filter out particles from your air. So it is probably going to be healthier air that people are breathing. So then why not? But I wouldn't advertise it as something that you're doing to decrease the risk of transmission of COVID-19, because there's no evidence to suggest that that is the case.
Good point. Okay. So we covered clients leaving their shoes and strollers outside, some cleaning advice and products, as well as the use of air purifiers in the studio. So those were all information.
I'm not sure if the question's been asked, but I do want to address something else.
Okay. This is studio related, studio photography related. Okay.
Studio sanitization related. And so I have seen a lot of chatter regarding steaming and also use of UV light in order to eradicate COVID-19 from surfaces. And I think what people need to realize is that, you know, steaming has not been proven to be effective because of the high temperature needed and the amount of time needed while exposed to that high temperature of steam. So if you're thinking about, oh gosh, what are they called? Those, you know, when you go to the dentist or the orthodontist, they have that little machine and you can put all the tools inside and they close the door.
Yes, yes.
What's it called? It's in the,
I don't know, but they're the UV, the light that sanitizes
their
their
equipment.
also
have the steam version, and it's on the tip of my tongue. Monoclave. I think it's called a monoclave.
Or autoclave.
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 I think it's an autoclave. There you go. And so, you know, there are these sort of lesser quality available machines and UV light boxes and UV light wands and et cetera, available, you know, on Amazon or anywhere that you're seeing. And so people might think, okay, well, I'll just buy this UV light box and I'll put my headbands in there. And then, you know, when I open it, everything's going to be fine. In fact, there has been a lot of research done on UV sterilization and what's necessary. And you would need to make sure that you have UVC light for one thing, and that light is at a certain wavelength of transmission. I can't remember exactly what it was. I had the information I was researching last week, but I do have links to provide that will give you guys all of that information. And so, you know, when you're buying something online, unless you're certain that it's a medical grade, in which case it's going to have quite a bit of a price tag, you know, associated to it. You know, I'm not sure that those are going to be effective solutions for you. And certainly those handheld UV wands have never been proven effective. You know, so that's not something I would rely on. Steaming is great for getting out your,
Wrinkles?
Wrinkles. Yeah, there you go. For removing wrinkles from your products, you know, and I guess in a sense, you know, general sanitization maybe against, I'm not quite sure what it would sanitize against, but you need to be very careful that what you are utilizing is going to be, you know, effectively treating the COVID-19. And so soap and water is currently the standard for washing. So unless your product can be washed with soap and water, I wouldn't say that it's going to be necessarily effective. It's the soap itself that's supposed to affect the outer layer of the virus, so that cell structure, and degrade it enough to cause the virus to quote unquote die. And so, you know, wool wash soaps, if you need to wash your wool layers, there is that option. A lot of our product as newborn photographers are so delicate. And I think, I mean, if you think about it, how often are we washing our headbands? How often are we washing our knitted newborn hats? A lot of the outfits, yes, we will be washing those that we're placing on babies' bodies or that come anywhere in contact with mouth for spit up. So this is the, we all know that, this yellow stainy spit up area on a baby. And so outfits do tend to be hand washed, I think, more often in the studio settings, but those other items are also risk factors because you're touching them and putting them on, and they're, you know, the hair can perhaps have virus on it as well if the parents have, you know, and that head is right next to breast milk some of the time if they're breastfeeding. And so there is a risk there, is what I'm trying to say. And I think for items that are difficult to wash, one idea could be that we quarantine our items and rotate them. And so, you know, perhaps you have different sets. Most of us are a bit propaholic. And so you likely have several wraps if you're, you know, even if you're a monochromatic type of photographer. I have my favorites, I will admit. There are those wraps I like using more than others, but I do have a plethora available to me. This is a chance for you to go out and explore your other props that you've sort of been neglecting, I suppose. But, you know, when we are allowed to re-enter into the workplace, that's something that I think that will be more common, is that seeing that we're going to need to space out clients and leave enough time in between to fully sanitize your studio surfaces, doorknobs, light switches, flooring, anything in the bathroom, taps, you know, any surface that someone might have touched, coffee machine, Keurig machine, you know, diaper dispenser, if you have a diaper warmer, your change station or table. There's a lot to sanitize. There's a lot to look at. And so I think that you're going to need a good amount of time between sessions, and possibly even days, you know, if that's what's legislated. And certainly that's how I would feel most comfortable returning to work, would be to space clients out over a period of days to allow time for that virus to degrade between, if it was anywhere where I happen to miss sanitizing. And so, yeah, I mean, you have to consider everything you're touching, everything you're holding, including that camera, all your lenses. So, you know,
this is it's all, the comments are all a chatter about the how much time between sessions is recommended, and we have Eva saying, you know, a week or two would essentially eliminate the virus, but then we have others asking, you know, can we be scheduling sessions every 2 weeks? That's not a lot of sessions, and you know, what's that going to mean for business if we're spacing them out so many weeks apart?
It's more than 0 sessions. That's what I would say. It's more than nothing. So it's better than nothing. And do remember that You know, like my whole take on this is that I honestly think it's going to be quite some time before we're allowed in the studio for in-person sessions. They will likely allow physiotherapists, chiropractors, massage therapists, people who are regulated, people who have a college that, you know, regulates how they conduct their businesses and puts restrictions and guidelines in place on their membership. And so as a physiotherapist, I have to be a regulated healthcare professional. With that, there is more responsibility given to you. So just because a physiotherapist can return to in-person treatment doesn't mean that a newborn photographer will be allowed to return to in-person sessions. And I think that that is because there are more than guidelines. There are regulations in place for those medical practitioners on what PPE must be in place, on what sanitization must be done in between clients, on things like those, you know, timing and spacing out between clients. And actually, to be honest with you, those guidelines are not yet in place in Canada. We have not yet been given that information from our colleges regarding what will be safe in terms of spacing out clients. But it's something that even the medical practitioners are going to have to consider and to do in our practices, which will mean fewer people coming through the doors, fewer, you know, people, like less income in our pockets. And it just is it's the nature of the current beast. We are not alone as newborn photographers in that struggle. And so, you know, when they do allow estheticians or hairdressers or that sort of thing back to in-person in work, that's likely around the same time that they may allow photographers to do in-studio sessions. Whether or not you will be allowed to work with a vulnerable population is a different thing. So, you know, a newborn is considered a vulnerable population. And so even at that, just because a hairdresser is allowed to give haircuts to other adults or other children above a certain age, doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe for you to return to in-studio handling of newborns. How do we deal with this as an industry? What can we do? Because, I mean, a lot of us are probably in a panic state hearing that and thinking, I'm gonna lose my business. I'm gonna lose everything. I'm not gonna be able to put food on my table. You know, like I help pay my mortgage. How is that going to happen? And so I hate this word. It's you know, you see that Friends meme with Ross, pivot.
Yes.
And probably your inbox is full of that word of different companies telling you how you need to pivot your business, but it is somewhat essential. Photographers need to find another way in which to work with newborns while these restrictions are in place. And, you know, physiotherapists have had to do the same. We've had to transition to virtual care. I'm not currently practicing. I'm on layoff, actually, in terms of physiotherapy. I was working part-time and went on temporary layoff. However, the owners of the business that I work for are able to do virtual sessions. And so they're doing virtual therapy care for people. I have seen photographers being, you know, so adaptable and so creative in their ways of you know, providing a service to people. I've seen people move to graphic design and elements, you know, creating cartoons and whatnot. I've seen people doing these virtual sessions through FaceTime. Whatever your take is on that, if you think it's going to damage the industry long-term or not, I think that we need to find a way forward and a way to adapt and to change and to mold ourselves around what these safety guidelines are. And that may mean outdoor sessions, which is not impossible. However, you know, it's a whole other beast when we're talking about a newborn. And so we may be looking a lot more towards images of parents with their babies, holding their babies, the babies being, you know, eternally swaddled, like clothes and then swaddled and then a wrap if you're in a cooler environment, a cooler setting, in order to be able to go into the parks and do that type of session. Now here in Ontario, our parks have just recently reopened for recreational use. That doesn't mean for us to walk in there and utilize the space and, you know, purchase the required permits, by the way, to utilize the space for photography sessions. But But certainly when we are allowed, I do think that's one of the ways in which that they will allow us to return to our occupation first. I think one of the first things they'll allow us to do is to conduct outdoors sessions, because there is less of a risk there if you can maintain that social distance and you're not in an inside space.
Yes, I was just reading Allie's, thank you for watching, Allie. She was talking about how parks are going to be reopened with groupings being allowed of 10 people as long as social distancing is allowed. Would you consider this being allowed, meaning that we are allowed to conduct outdoor sessions?
I would wait for the official guideline from your government source. So I'm not going to comment as APNPI as to whether or not it is appropriate for you to be conducting an outdoor session or not. That is something that you need to follow the guideline of wherever you live. So currently in Ontario, I wholeheartedly believe the answer to that question to be no. Because what I've seen is that from people who are asking their local governing bodies, so like your citywide government, are getting very conflicting messages. Some saying, yes, this is fine as long as you're not charging money.
Oh.
This is not fine,
right.
if you're out there. So, I mean, it's very, whenever, like I said before, whenever there's conflicting information, go with the safest margin. So that'll allow you the least opportunity for error. So currently there is no clear guideline to state that retail can return to in-person service other than people who can provide curbside pickup and that sort of thing. So I would wait till you hear from your government source that it is appropriate for you to be going outdoors and doing outdoor sessions. When you have heard that, and feel free to email your local government or your MP, for us, it's provinces, it may be states, your statewide, what's that called? Like governor?
I have no idea. Yes, I think governor.
So but, contact them, contact their offices and get clarification for yourself so that you have documented, clarification on what those restrictions look like for yourself, for your conducting your business in your area. Make sure that you have, from the highest possible level, permission to do what it is you're doing. But when you are able to return, probably those outdoor sessions are going to be deemed safest, until you're able to get back into that studio setting. So learning to make that pivot, and perhaps it's a matter of, coming into somebody else's home and doing a documentary style newborn session in their home where, most of the infection that is there, they've already been exposed to. They live there. So the risk is to you and then you carrying it on to others. So what I would say is if you're entering someone's home, when you are allowed to do so again, that you take all of the precautions necessary, that you sanitize and hand wash on entry because you don't want to bring anything in. You bring minimal items into their home. Those items are sanitized or washed in between use and in between putting in your car. The minute you put it in your car, if your car surface isn't washed, well, that's an issue. So bringing a light stand into a home before you set it up, sanitize everything, make sure that there's nothing on it that's going to then be of risk when you put it down on their floor. Your lights, your anything you bring with you, you're going to need to sanitize as you enter the home. So documentary style is really quite nice because you might perhaps bring your camera and a light source, but most of everything else you can get from them in their home. I've, tried this style of photography and started offering it, and it's really well received. And if that's their only option, I think people will really love that, even if they were tending towards that posed look. But maintaining that social distance in that space wherever possible, and making sure that everything is sanitized again when you leave that space, and then delivering everything online. Maybe that's a way that they'll allow us to return once people are allowed to have outside visitors entering their home space. There's a lot of things to consider, and I think you just really want to understand that you entering a space with other people who live together means that there's two sides of risk. There's the risk of you bringing something to them, and there's the risk of them exposing you. And if you're somebody who then is going to go into multiple homes, you definitely need to make sure that whatever it is you're bringing into those homes, that either there's an appropriate amount of time between those sessions, which again has not yet been recommended. So you need to err on the safest, side and say, like, what's the longest that this virus can live on a surface? What is the longest? Some sources will say 5 days. I'll try to find that out for you and link something, some resource, some scientific resource of, I've seen different surfaces, 3 days, 5 days. What is the right amount of time? And then space out your sessions by that amount of time.
And for those of you just joining, Stephanie did cover where to find information on recommended products for cleaning and sanitizing a few minutes ago. And I think we're going to post the link to those, where to find information on recommended cleaners after this is done. And Chandra Tim has just joined, and she, regarding the headband, so this is going back a little bit.
Hi, Chandra.
She says she doesn't think it's safe to have all headbands and hats stored out in the open. She has had hers stored in individual sealed bags or containers for sanitary purposes, and she washes everything with soap and water, and she recommends to have enough props not to use the same items often.
That's exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah.
So for anything that you can washing with the soap and the water, even if it's a wool product, there are wool soaps available for that, for gentle hand washing. And then quarantining the items. And so keeping them separated in bags is an interesting and probably a really great suggestion, actually, because if you are to store them next to each other, all touching, then certainly you can spread something from one to another. So that is a great suggestion, to have them separately, stored, and just ensuring that when you touch that baggie, when you're putting it back in, the hands that are touching the baggie also have to be sanitary. So they have to have been recently hand washed, and so that you're not transmitting anything to the baggies, or else we're facing the exact same problem. So
yes.
Yeah.
And for larger
items, I think, might be the best solution in this, So for those propaholics out there who have been, hard on themselves for all of the money they have spent on their variety of props, this is your time to shine. Yeah.
Oh, indeed. Okay, let's move on. So this whole last segment was really pertaining to those studio photographers. And so let's get back to just photographers in general. And let's see, we talked about number of sessions per day and week. Let's talk about paperwork going forward. What are your thoughts on adding something to our contracts, implementing some new questionnaires, asking our clients about recent travel or sickness, and liability waivers? So I know we're not lawyers, so, we can only provide what we've,
Yeah, we are not lawyers, but I will say this. We recently got quotes done for roofing for our house, because we've had we had some wind damage, and there's an immediate need in order to fix the roof. It's not something we can wait on. And so we did have some quotes come through from different businesses, and it was very interesting for us to see the different approach that the different businesses took to this, to the problem of coming to quote you. And so they're outside of your home. They are not in your home to quote you on a roof. And, but to understand whether or not they were going to keep social distancing in play, or how they would deliver their quote to you. Would this be on paper? Would it be, digitally? And so there were a variety of different ways in which people did present to us. But I found that certainly I was most impressed by one of the companies that didn't have any personal in-person contact. And so it was, they were fully, didn't even ring the doorbell, texted when they came to let us know that they would be there, went and inspected and did what they needed to do without contact with us as a family, and then left without leaving any paperwork, but let us know that that would be arriving via email. So online, forms and questionnaires and all of that is a great solution here. Online contracts with, digital signatures. I know that can be something that people are a little bit it can be, you know, what's the legality surrounding that? I do use online contracts through Sprout Studio, which I believe are, I mean, I've had my lawyer draft those. And so she has put in place and made sure that, you know, I believe it is legitimate that, that when they do digitally sign, that it carries their IP address and whatnot. But certainly you can do that and then have them sign something in person when they are with you for the session. But I think people need to see those policies ahead of time. And some of us, you know, when you're providing like a higher end service, maybe you were mailing out an information packet ahead of time. And it was really lovely to receive, because how many of us get mail anymore? So getting that beautiful folder, and it's got, you know, pricing guides and information guides and your business card laid out beautifully, and, you know, different product options and all of that, and then pamphlets for future sessions and whatnot. These are beautiful marketing tools, but in the current setting, you know, perhaps it might be better not to send out so much paper and to use digital instead for digital transmission of information. How long does it take to mail something?
There's also a huge delay in the mail system in Canada anyway.
There is.
That's something to consider as well.
Yeah, definitely there is. So certainly moving, if you haven't already, to an online platform for questionnaires and whatnot would be a great idea. I do think that you should make your client aware of all of your policies ahead of time and have them agree to those ahead of time. So if you are going to be taking their temperature at the door, that should be in your policies, and they should have access to that ahead of time, to that knowledge, and to agree to it. So that if there is any, you know, disparity between what they're comfortable with and what you're going to need in order to conduct your business safely for them and for your other clients that will come to see you, that you can work that out ahead of time and decide whether or not they're a good fit for your business. It's, again, a really hard time. Like I say that, but all of us are so struggling for money that maybe you want to compromise and allow people to, you know, get away with, I don't want to agree to that, so I'm not. Okay, fine, I'll make the exception just for you. But I think that, again, we need to be err on the side of safety, right? Like err on that side, because for liability purposes, that's going to be really important that you have everything laid out. Thus far, I'm not sure. I've never seen a case of where someone has, you know, sued anybody because they exposed them to the virus. Can they prove it? And all of that sort of, those kinds of questions are going to come up. But I don't want to be in the middle of that. And certainly I don't want to be in a position where, now that tests are becoming more readily available, tracking the spread is going to be extremely important in order to contain any other outbreaks. So although, you know, you go up in the curve and you see the curve coming down and you think it's over, usually there's going to be a second wave, a third wave. What people are realizing now in the medical field is that tracking is essential. And so they're really bumping up their practices for, or the availability of testing. And so they're going to want to know in future, when somebody does become ill, who have they been in contact with, so that they then can go back and trace that back. Have you seen the movie Outbreak? This was like the whole premise of the movie. They were trying to trace it back to the origin of the outbreak. And so that has been extremely effective in helping people to contain the spreads of these types of viruses. So I don't want to be in that situation where now I'm sick and I have had contact with X, Y, Z, and I'm going to have, you know, now they need to be contacted to be told, guess what, your photographer has COVID-19, you visited them, now you need to get tested. They're not going to feel great about that scenario. But so that's why you want to make sure that you're putting in place all of the precautions that you can, that you're doing your very best job of following those CDC and WHO guidelines, that you are, you know, washing your hands and sanitizing your items and quarantining items and spacing out your sessions and not taking shortcuts. And so, you know, those types of policies need to be in there and readily available for your clients to view, so that they can be on the same working plane as you. So if anything does happen, if it does go wrong, and they do end up needing to be contacted to say, guess what, Stephanie Robin has COVID-19 and you had a session with her last week, and so now you need to be tested. At least they know that I have taken as many precautions as possible in the lead up, and perhaps my own exposure then would have not been of my own doing. It could have been because I was in line at the grocery store. And that perhaps there's less of a chance that I've then sent that on to them because they know that I'm taking those precautions in my business, and ensuring that my clients as well are adhering to my guidelines and policies.
And I think I know your answer to this question. Marcella Lemon Shoots. Hi, Marcella.
Hi, Marcella.
She asked, do you recommend that a lawyer helps us draft these new measurements? Example, temperature taking, symptom asking, or is us drafting something enough?
So usually I talked to Rachel Brinke about this previously in an interview we did that lives somewhere on the site in the resources section. And she does recommend that you do have any and all of your contracts looked over by a lawyer because, to be frank, it's necessary in order to make sure that they are going to stand up in court. That's expensive. It certainly can be expensive at times. And so utilizing a draft ahead of time or having something that you go in with that you have created yourself, or that, you've looked into some resources on what should be included and you include those yourself, and then bringing that to a lawyer is less costly. And in that, you're going to need to sit with them and establish a relationship with a lawyer so that they can understand what your job entails. Because, different types of photographers have different types of jobs, different types of lawyers serve as different types of law, right? So I wouldn't expect that a lawyer would necessarily, if I walk in and say, hi, I'm a newborn photographer, they may not understand all the intricacies of what that entails. So, in-person handling of newborns, positioning them in different, positions and wrapping them and clothing them. And, as you start to divulge all of that information, they may come up with other information or policies that you need to have included within your contract that you might not have thought of, just because now they have a better understanding of how you conduct your business. So are you going to other people's homes? Are they coming to yours? Is your studio within your home? Is your studio in a retail space? So, where does the liability stop and start in those instances? If you have a work studio retail space, who's in charge of that maintenance of that parking lot if they get injured there, or if they get injured in the entrance of your space, or, there's all kinds of questions that you need to divulge. They need to understand the information so that they can help you to properly write something that would stand up. And even then, there's no guarantee, really. But that is definitely the safest measure. So I would say yes. If you're going to add to your policy, consult with your lawyer. And if you don't have one, ask for a consult with a lawyer. You can get those for free, at which point you can bring your documents with you and say, look, this is what I have. This is my situation. How much would it cost for me to have you review what I have already and either ensure that it's done properly, et cetera. So you can at least get some quotes that way.
Yes. And also, it differs between countries as well. I know we have some American photographers here and then some Canadian, and I know wording is different for various things in our industry and in our contracts. So if you are in Canada, for example, I wouldn't recommend going with a contract that you found from a US lawyer's website.
Yes.
That's something to consider and think about.
Yes. So, these are business expenses, right? Running a business is expensive. It just is. Buying a brand new system, computer system, it's expensive. It's thousands of dollars. Buying the body of your camera is expensive. Buying a new lens is expensive. Ensuring the liability is covered is expensive. It all is. It's all the overhead of running a business. It's what business owners have to do. It's, partially there are loans available for people if that's something that you're struggling with. It's a difficult scenario. It's a difficult time to be doing that and to be looking into that. And perhaps when you are speaking with a lawyer or looking for that quote, you can voice that concern that, I'm not even sure my business will be here in 2 years if I can't financially support it, right now. So we are certainly hoping that people will not lose their businesses in this pandemic. We are certainly hoping that, and I have faith in our community that we're creative enough that we can still function, we can still make money, we can still stay alive in this time as businesses, and that we can do so while adhering to the guidelines that are in place and the restrictions that are necessary in order to keep our communities safe.
One more thing I'd like to add on the similar topic is to also check in with your insurance.
Yes.
You know I'm personally planning to call them when I decide to go back to work, whenever that is right for me, and just to make sure that I'm good to go from their perspective as well, because that's also something important that I haven't heard mentioned very often. Yes, your business insurance.
That is a huge point. So if you do take a leap and without contacting, you know, your local governors or your local MPs or whatever it is, your local government for your state, for your province, if you do not have that go ahead to go back to work in the ways in which you are working. So perhaps there is going to be a phase 1 or a phase 2, whenever it is that they allow us to go back, and maybe they are saying, okay, you can conduct business outdoors, you can conduct business, you know, with maintaining social distancing indoors. So if you are conducting your business and sort of not following those guidelines, and oh, I'm just going to touch it and it'll just be one little, okay, we're good now I'll maintain social distancing. That's not adhering to those restrictions, to those guidelines. And so will that negate your insurance if something happens and someone comes back and there is a liability claim against your business? If you're not incorporated, that could affect your entire life, your entire savings, your home, your marriage, if you're married, and any equity that you have. It could really devastate you. So in one sense, looking into incorporation is a good idea. I feel that there are a lot of different ways to be a photographer, for sure. There are hobbyist photographers, there are professional photographers, there are sole proprietor photographers, there are incorporated photographers. And, you need to look into what is the best structure for your business. For myself, it's incorporation, just because I need separation between myself and my personal income, my personal equity, my home, my car, my husband's money in savings, which is ours. But you see what I'm saying? Like anything that we've built together for ourselves, for our children, I need to protect against anything that could happen with my business. And so separating yourself from your business can be very handy in that sense. It isn't cheap. It can be done, relatively inexpensively. I think I incorporated one of my businesses after having already had the experience of incorporating one through lawyers, which was somewhere around the 2,000 mark. I then did another for 500 something because I had the experience already. I knew what needed to be filled out and submitted and all of that. So, but your taxes every year when you pay for tax time will be higher, but you have to kind of measure like it's like buying life insurance, I suppose, in a way, in the sense that, is it worth it to pay more for taxes yearly if I'm protecting my family and my children, their nest egg, for their futures.
So definitely these are all things that we should be checking in with our lawyer, accountant, and insurance provider before we go back to work.
Yes, it's heavy stuff. It is heavy stuff, guys. We like babies. We like cuteness. We like to bring beauty into the world, and we're sometimes, in a sense, simple in that way, in that love and in that passion and in that directive. I just want to make beautiful things for people to love. Yes. I just want to create happiness for clients. I just want to preserve beautiful memories, and that's wonderful. But it's a marriage of the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain. You have to have the creativity, the passion, and the love, and all of that. But you also have to have that business sense and have that solid foundation that you can then jump off of in order to ensure that you are doing things safely and that you are protecting yourself and others. So hopefully this has helped, I guess, in a sense.
Yes. Well, I think that's a great way to end, because we have been going for about an hour now. And I think if you have any more questions, and if we've missed any of your questions, we'll try to answer them below the video on the page. And we may think about coming on here again if we do get an onslaught of additional questions, maybe in a few weeks, if, you know, when new information is released from the government. Let us know what you would prefer.
Absolutely. I think I'm open to that. I'm open to coming back. And actually, we were contacted early this morning, I believe by a member whose
yes, Christy.
An epidemiologic virologist. So we do have a resource that we can connect with and to ask some questions. Perhaps they might know the answer of how many, you know, what's that spacing? What's the best possible answer for how long should I wait in between sessions? And we can certainly submit those questions and see if we can get an answer. Of course, it's best when the answers come from research and science and evidence-based practicing and, you know, like level 1A evidence, grade A, level 1 evidence, you know, from scientific research. Unfortunately, this COVID-19 is so new that it'll take some time before that, you know, evidence is available, because you need studies and studies and studies that are done appropriately, that can be replicated. And then you need to compile all those studies together and look at them together. And that's how you're going to come out with that best evidence for the answers to some of these questions. So that does take time, unfortunately. And, you know, I'm sorry that we can't give you some answers right today of those burning questions that you have. And you just want those easy guidelines. I do too. I want to know. I just want someone to tell me and to know that that's scientifically sound information, and I can move forward with that, and it makes me feel safe, and it makes me feel like I can make my clients feel safe. The reality is we're not there yet. And I hope that we'll get there in future. But right now, we are not there yet. We are not at a place where I can give you those guidelines comfortably to say 100% science backed, this is what it is. And so, you know, in the interim, practice best, safest practices. So if you're, you know, worried that maybe the virus can live on a surface for 5 days, or if some, you know, scientific resource says they are finding that it's living for 14 days, okay, great. I'm quarantining for over 2 weeks then. I'm going with the worst case scenario to try to protect my clients and myself the best that I can.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you for all of you for watching. We will aim to get to everybody's comments after this is done, and stay tuned for what's coming in the future, because it's who knows? We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you. Okay, we're not live anymore.